our customers with the standards-based approach. So, for example, what are they doing in the standards lately? Well, they're putting now there's a multiple WAN requirement. You got to have 2 ISP connections, and some of them put dates. Like the IHG was, I think, into last January. You were supposed to have the two ISP connections and 7.5 meg minimum coming into the property. We're seeing that again in the Microtel standards. Kind of got that in as a sort of a better and best, where you want to have a minimum of 7.5 meg. You want to have 2 lines. Even better to have 20 meg. That kind of a thing. And they're going to come in and test that. As a lot of you probably know already, it'll be tested, and the property will have to do it, or get penalized if they don't. The second big part of the standards that's going on is the log. How does the login page need to look? How does it act? Is it a single access code? Does the access code need to change weekly? And we'll get into a little bit later when we dive into the GUI, sort of how we support that. Basically, any of those things can be supported with the proper login page. And then they're doing a lot more also in terms of sort of cloud-based information coming off the login page. You've got connection logging, where a lot of the brands are looking now at limiting their liability by having a log at each site. So basically, if there's any warnings, they comply with what's required by the RIAA or MPAA, and that's all part of the DMCA Digital Millennium Act that was passed years ago, is to limit your liability. So we took a look at a lot of that and did it. And then the local user account attributes, as I talked about, and then all the other network settings, like you got to have auto IP, you got to support VPN users, have a block of static IPs assigned to your VPN users, and the list goes on. The key thing here is we keep these standards on file, so if anybody ever has a question, chances are we're going to have the latest version of the standard, and we can kind of consult with you and look at it and make sure you're comfortable that our product supports it, or if there's any questions, we'll dive into that. Okay, in terms of kind of touched on the login page. Here's a sample page. Looks pretty basic. You got to accept the T's and C's. You need to enter an access code, and this is for a Holiday Inn Express. So the access code is generally they're going to ask that it be changed every week, and it's a single field rather than a double field code. And there's a lot of things going on the page. If you did a view source on this page, you'd see some JavaScript on the latest page. There's some cloud-based stuff where they're starting to want to track user information, how many users are getting on, and so on and so forth at each property. And we support all that. A lot of that's not so much what we're doing, but what's going on the login page. But the bottom line is, it's just a kind of an integration to get your login page working, get the code that we require on the login page, provide that snippet, and then kind of the rest of it is sort of between the page and the back end that IHG is running. And so anyway, different pages, different brands require different login pages. Some require a post authentication redirect, and where you redirect to the home page of the actual property, and that's all stuff that we support. Okay, so moving from kind of the hotel market to MTU, MDU, where the biggest difference we see is around utilization rates, where in apartments people are going to be online a lot, and they're living there, and in dorms they're multiply that by 2 or 3 because they're college students. And so you just want to start thinking about, I'm going to have a lot of file sharers here. Am I going to, are we going to support file sharing on the network? If so, we're going to have a ton of bandwidth coming in to support it. If not, we take the approach we're not going to support file sharing, and limit people down to where they're going to have a good web browsing experience. Their email is going to work, but if they want to go and file share, it's not going to work. And maybe you put that into the T's and C's, of the login page. And so these are the applications we don't support. And if we find you're doing them, we'll take you off the network. So you can do that with our product. So it's the kind of thing where, probably going to need bigger pipe coming into an apartment. You're probably going to, want just one-time login. Somebody who logs in, maybe they have one device or multiple devices. They never have to log in again. Stores their MAC address, that kind of a thing. Definitely security. But security is big on all these networks. Nobody can see anybody else type of thing. Layer 2 isolation, which we provide. You've got a lot of the same things that you find in the hotel market, the VPNs. So here it basically comes more down to a user experience where they're not going to see the login page. You provide the internet access with their lease, and maybe they get an account to log in the first time, and they never have to log in again. So that's kind of probably the big difference there is just the initial experience and the authentication. And then because you have more users, you might want to look at stacking, multiple 3560s, which we support. You can stack currently up to 2, and we're going to allow more later. So you get 400, up to a maximum of 400 concurrent users performance rating on that. And should be good. It's typically well more than, the most hotels, kind of the average hotels, but in an apartment setting, you could very well need that type of performance. And then the next one is the paid-for-use network, where you're getting typically probably looking more at radius-based authentication, which we support, and either setting up your own radius server, or you go with a billing service, a radius-based billing service, and we have a few select people that we know, companies we know providing the billing services that we refer people to. If you're just getting started, you'd rather let somebody else handle the billing part of it. The advantage of going with Radius is it's central, it's secure. You could have multiple sites, one account working across multiple sites. It's a standard. Lots of people support it. It's kind of proven technology. That's why a lot of it is done. A lot of it is done with Radius. You've got credit card billing, PayPal billing, sort of integrated. Can be integrated with that. So kind of the decision there comes down to, do you run it yourself, or do you have a service run it for you that's already put in Radius? Now, on a paid-per-use network, you could also go with our local account, so as we'll show later, and that's going to work well for one site, or prepaid cards if somebody wants to come in and pay. We even have one customer that needed to facilitate cash payments only, taking only cash payments, which is kind of interesting, but that's the market they're in. So somebody comes in and they give a $5 bill to get on the internet, and so then they get a prepaid card. That $5 is going to give you a day pass or an hour pass or whatever. So you could set up all of this in the local account database, and we support that. And different accounts can have different times, different bandwidths, things like that. So as far as the different bandwidth plans, what we're seeing is even in the free market, and this is kind of a good discussion to have, is even when hotels are free, offering free service, they may want to offer a higher speed service where you pay for it, get a higher bandwidth, you pay for a higher bandwidth, and it's being called bandwidth upsell. It's also IP upsell, where you get an IP address, you pay for that. So these would be sort of things that you might be looking at, and again, we support that. Either can be done through Radius, give them a higher bandwidth on a Radius account, or a higher bandwidth on a local user account. And that's typically called bandwidth upsell. And then, again, the subscription-based internet, maybe you just give somebody an account where you're going to roam across, multiple sites. You see this a lot in, RV parks, for example. This is pretty common. You're going to see it in, other types of venues where they've got multiple sites, national chains, and somebody gets an account and they roam. And really, the best way to do that is to run a Radius server, because it's going to centrally store all those accounts one place. Okay, and the last scenario that we want to go through here is a little bit different. There's again some of the technology is the same, but you're looking at providing web access, and for those of you that have been doing visitor-based networks like hotels and so forth, you definitely, if you're looking to grow your business, you start looking at could you work with an organization, a business, a government agency, a hospital, where what they want to provide is limited access to the internet to somebody, a patron who comes in there, but they don't want to let them on the network, and they don't want to sort of let them sitting all day, abusing this. So it's definitely picking up in in healthcare. We've provided a lot of gateways to healthcare facilities, hospitals, and so forth. Nursing homes, retirement homes, sort of the same thing, where you've got sort of this regular network that they run their business on, but now visitors are going to come in and just get on the internet. A business that deals a lot with the public, it makes sense. Enterprises that are inviting contractors and vendors in. How do they get them on the network but do it securely? And so some of the things we've been hearing about and providing for is they give prepaid cards to visitors in the lobby. Say, here's your day pass, same login name. Probably want to get into VLAN a lot more there. So put that user on a separate VLAN, and they completely VLANed off from the rest of the network. You can set up hours of service on that type of thing, and then the security is key. So it tends to be a pretty complex thing when you really get into it, and that's one where we really look at each one case by case, and what's the requirement, and what network is are we going to be overlaid onto, and we do support VLAN for that type of scenario. And then finally, just kind of getting back to bandwidth, because this applies to all of these scenarios. Is we came out with the BA4000, a product a lot of you are already using. We've shipped a lot of units, mostly going to hotels. So we brought the product out earlier this year. Yeah, we see a good market there for just putting in this type of device in this small to medium-sized enterprise. So maybe not what you call a visitor-based network necessarily. There's people are working there every day, but they need more bandwidth, and they need the high availability that a BA4000 is going to provide, the automatic failover, quality of service. And so, just as you're looking at your opportunities out there, you can find that you take a product like this into other types of organizations who want to combine or aggregate multiple WAN lines. Okay, and then just to kind of talk about what we're doing and where we fit in the market, with respect to other products that are out there. The two that we focus a lot on are the NC3560. We started with the 3500 and 3550, now 3560, and we really tailored it to provide all the visitor-based features to really be an industry leader, yet at an affordable price. So have all the features that are needed, come out with 3 or 4 revisions every year, but do it at an affordable price, because a lot of these places are budget constrained these days, and so we come in at about half the price of the similar products, and we feel like we've really wanted to focus on that. So both high performance, lots of features, working a lot on reliability, yet at an affordable price. And we've done the same thing with the BA4000. We brought it out. We looked at the other products out there. We come in about half the price. What you find with aggregators is, and also with gateways, is you've kind of got the really, really inexpensive products, but they probably aren't going to do something like the VPN support. That's going to be a really hard one, because there's a lot that goes on there to automatically assign a public IP to a user and then have that work with their VPN server. And on the 4000, now that address needs to be sort of bound to the ISP that owns that address. So while it's aggregating all the other traffic, that traffic cannot be aggregated. You get into those types of issues, and it sort of separates a lot of products out in terms of what's going to work. And yet, with the products that do support that, they tend to be about twice our price. So we try to get right in the middle where it's affordable, yet the key advanced features need to be supported. And that's what we feel like we've done with the 3560 and the 4000, and you can use them very well together. They're very complementary now to go into a site, and the BA4000 manages the WAN lines, passes the VPN addresses through, allows the port forwarding for management, and then the 3560 kind of sits behind it and handles the users. And so I think, let's see, I think we're towards the end. We're at the end here, and we wanted to jump into the GUI and then introduce Michael Edison, who's going to drive the GUI, and then we'll just take questions here at the end. You can just sort of type in your questions, and we'll answer them verbally for everybody to hear. So, Michael, here you go.
Hi, this is Michael. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar. This is going to be a pretty quick just walkthrough of kind of some of the configuration areas that Dave talked about. And definitely, please do give us, any kind of specific questions you have, and we can definitely go in more detail and kind of look at, some of the more complicated configurations. Since the key to all these sites is kind of having the right configuration for the requirements for those sites. So one of the first things that Dave talked about is the need to kind of control user activity in terms of sessions and bandwidth, and that's something that we can see here on the WAN and LAN settings. So if we go down into the subscriber bandwidth limits section, we can see that you can assign a global limit. And the nice thing about the global limit is it kind of gives you a guaranteed cap on everything. So even if you have pass-through users, you have terms of service users, you have users who only get an hour free at the cafe, everybody on the system will be capped by this limit. At the same time, you may have specific users or groups of users who log on, and they may get a little bit less than this cap, but you kind of know that you have this absolute cap. On the other hand, some people want to have a cap for everyone except a few special people. A lot of times we hear the manager at the hotel has to have an unlimited connection, for his computer in his office. So you also can allow the individual user accounts to override this bandwidth limit. So as you can see here, there's tons of options here that you can use to kind of customize exactly how the bandwidth is going to be portioned out. The other thing that's important, especially for things like dormitories or big sites where you think you might have a lot of file sharing, is to limit the number of IP sessions. And an IP session is just basically a single connection from a local PC to some piece of equipment out on the internet. In the case of file sharing, they may be trying to open up 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 individual connections, to get their little pieces of files that they want to download. But if you enable the session limit, what you'll do is you'll cap them at a more rational limit. 30 is pretty aggressive. We see customers set this to 50 or 100. Much above 100, you're not really going to be impacting your file sharers. If you set it lower than 30, what's going to happen is people with legitimate applications, maybe they want to see, Google Maps, and it's trying to load, 30 or 40 or 50 images at the same time. They may start to get caught up by the session limit. But this is something you should always set on a public network, unless you have some special requirement where, for some reason, there's some legitimate use of, hundreds or thousands of sessions at your site. So certainly you always have the option of enabling this feature. So the other thing that Dave talked about is how to set up the user accounts. So if you take a look at the local, so here's all the different configurations you can use for authentication. Specific to the local authentication, you can add a new user. And you can see in here that we've created some sample accounts. And each one of these accounts can have its own bandwidth limit. It can have its own username, password. What we see a lot of times is customers don't want to assign an account for every single user on the system, though that might make sense for something like an apartment building. For something like a hotel, it's better to have kind of groups of users, or maybe there's just a single account that everyone in the hotel uses. And what's often required by hotel specifications is that there be a different account or a different password that's used every week. And you can see here we've basically set up some sample accounts. So this would be the guest for week 1, and they would all use this password. And then after a week, this account is expired and nobody can ever use it again. And then for week 2, you would give the hotel manager this account to give out to users. So basically, in this way, you could set up all the usernames and passwords for a site, up to a year in advance or more, and then you never would have to go back to that site and reconfigure the accounts or delete the old accounts. You basically would just give them a list of the passwords per week, going forward a year or multiple years, and as long as they, are handing out the right codes, everything's going to work fine, and there's not going to be any overlap with the old codes. And you can also see on these accounts, this particular account doesn't have any limit. More typically, if you're not using a global limit, you could assign, per user limit. Some people want to set the limits as low as 16 kilobits. That's mighty low. More typical user limits are probably 512 or 1024. And if you want to have symmetrical connections, you can also do that as well. In addition, if you have a very specific bandwidth limit that you need 1024 down, and you need 518 up. There are places where you can customize that as well. So let's see, we can close this. So the next thing we can do is we can take a look at what some of the authentication options are. Dave talked about using Radius. So there's a pretty extensive list of Radius settings you can use here. You can also do some pretty sophisticated things. You can assign bandwidth limits over Radius. You can also track users' locations by their VLAN identification over Radius. In addition, there's a full interface for the Hampton Inn. If you happen to be doing any Hampton Inns, they have their own proprietary backend. You can also do a real simple, just terms of service-based page where you don't have to worry about passwords or login codes or anything like that. Basically, it's just a terms of service that the subscriber can agree to and log on that way. We actually have a lot of sites that use no authentication, and those are usually sites where they just want to serve some ads to users, or they want to control bandwidth, or they want to redirect people to a branded login page, but they don't want to deal with any kind of passwords or any kind of access control. So yeah, surprisingly, there's a lot of systems get set to no authentication. But even using no authentication, you can still blacklist people. You can still create, bandwidth limits. So you still have a lot of control. And there's also a FIAS-based PMS authentication that can work for Micro's Fidelio sites. So definitely let us know if you have a Fidelio opportunity. And then the last section we can look at is kind of some of your options in dealing with the login pages. By default, there's just a real simple login page you can customize in terms of the text and load a banner. But kind of more typically, we see customers either using an external portal page that has the code, specific to the hotel requirements, or we also have a lot of customers who, rather than hosting an external portal, actually load all the pages onto the controller itself, and that can be a nice way not to have that complication of having to host a server with a lot of pages on it and have some kind of location awareness, to serve up the location-specific login pages. So, and the controller will hold 2 or 3 megabytes or more of data from a login page. So there's plenty of page there. There's plenty of space there to load any kind of reasonable size portal page. So that's pretty much what we're going to cover in going through the GUI. I guess one more thing we can look at is there's been some interest, especially lately, in this Digital Millennium Copyright Act. I know a lot of hotels get complaints from movie, the holders of rights to movies or to music, and you get kind of takedown notices. And the way that system works is that basically the movie owners complain to the ISP, and then the ISP has liability unless they can pass it on to somebody else. So they pass it on to the hotel. And then again, the hotel's got liability for it unless they can pass it on again. So this is basically a feature that allows you to record every subscriber session on the system. Anytime they go to a web page, anytime they download a file, anytime they upload a file, you have a complete record of exactly what the connection was, who it was from, who it was to, what the time was, and it basically gives you a perfect match to the takedown notice that you get from the DMCA. So if you can maintain these connection logs for a site, for months or years, you'll never have an issue with, getting a complaint that you can't show, came from a subscriber account. And we're starting to see a requirement to do this kind of logging is starting to creep into the hotel specifications. So we're expecting that there's going to be more detailed requirements for this because, one, there's just the hassle of getting takedown notices from the ISP and potentially losing your connection or having your connection throttled, as well as the issue of there's real liability issues. And I know, they haven't been suing as many sites as they had in the past, but there's certainly no guarantee that they're not going to start suing again if they don't have a lot of luck changing the laws. So that pretty much covers the basic features in the GUI.
All right, thank you, Michael. And now we're going to break into a question and answer session. I see a few have already come in. If you'd like to submit more questions, just go to the bottom right-hand side of your dashboard there and submit them. So let's take the first one.
Is that you right there? Is that user set up?
Is that user set up in the radius? Let's see. So I think you're referring to the local authentication table versus the radius, and those are two independent areas. So maybe Michael could talk a little bit more about radius and how that all works.
Let me just say, I think the question was when we were talking about the bandwidth limits, and is the user set up in radius? So just to let you know, when you're looking at bandwidth limits and radius. So if we look at what we do on the radius side, basically what we're telling, we're saying where the radius server is and all of that stuff, and then we're conforming to the radius packet standards. I think it's 1812 and 1813. These various standards, and then there's a bandwidth attribute in there that we use. There's an attribute we use for bandwidth. So if you're using radius, you're going to set your bandwidth limits up on the radius server. That's going to be attached to a user account, and then when that user logs in, the radius acknowledgement is going to come back to us and tell us what bandwidth that user gets, and then it's ultimately tied to their MAC address. So it says, okay, that user at that MAC address is going to get this bandwidth. So if you're running radius, the bandwidth limits we were going through, aren't going to really be really set up on the gateway. It's going to be set up on the radius server. So I think that was the question there. And then on the second question, does the system let you upload a file of users instead of setting up each user at a time? Yes. Okay, great question. So basically when we're talking about the local user database, then we were showing you how you individually use them, but you've got this capability to import a local user database, as Michael shows right there, as we show, and that can be a CSV file. We've got a tool actually, and for some of you that have been using our product a lot, you might know that this database is XML format. That's what we use. If you don't like XML, you want to use CSV, we've got this tool we provide. And it just basically converts from CSV to XML. So yes, you could set up, and that's a pretty good way to go. You set up all your accounts in an Excel file. Let's say you're doing this for the 2 years, like we were talking about earlier, or 5 years, or 10 years. You set them all up. you put them in an Excel file, you print it out, give it to the property, and then you upload that file, and now that's done. So that's kind of how you would facilitate that, is you do not have to type them in one at a time. Okay, the next question then is the PMS interface. About the PMS interface, is it serial or Ethernet? And the answer to that is that what we're providing is PMS interface over Ethernet, and then you can get an IP or IP, TCP IP, and then you can get an IP to serial converter. And we've tested and worked that. So if you got a PMS that's serial only, you need an IP to serial converter. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. Then the next question, we've got some more questions here about the user limit. So global user limit, where is that user set up? And I think so. If you want the local user accounts to have a limit and have that override that global, Michael, it gets back to this drop down here, and you can even have profiles. This drop down shows particular values that are already in there up and down, but you can set up a profile where you type in whatever you want and then have different profiles set up for different users. So that is available. And then the next question is I think, does the 3560 have more CPU power than the 3500? And the answer to that is it's got more resources. Okay, the CPU, really, when you look at the 3560 compared to the 3500 and 3550, it's got 4 times the RAM, and it does have a faster CPU. Yeah, okay, so Michael says it's much faster. And, it also has 4 times the RAM, which for any of you tech people know, that gives you a lot more performance. And so, yeah, you're going to see that compared to 3550 to 3560 or 3500 compared to 3560, you're going to see a lot better performance out of the 3560. Okay, another question coming in here is, are there different products for different size usage? What if I have a small business center with local computers and enough seats for 5 to 10? Okay, well, on that note, I mean, that's a great question, and it's kind of a question, I guess, on the marketing side that we've been looking at for a long time. And we used to have a product called the 3000, going way back. It was kind of designed for really small hotspots, and what we found is that the market really required more more power. It just, even if you only have 5 to 10 users or a small site, you'd be surprised what you need in terms of capability. You still want to have bandwidth limits. So the answer is we've got the 3560, and that's our bread and butter product. We've tried to price it where it's affordable for any type of application. We offer a kit, where it comes with an AP at a pretty good price, and there's no license limit like some of the other products have. So we tried to make it in a way really focus on one product, and even for a small site, you'd be surprised. You want to have bandwidth limiting, and you just want to have a lot of capability, because it's not always about the number of users. It's also about the how you want to control those users. So that I think that answers that one. It's one product. Okay, the next question coming in is there a way, and appreciate all these questions, by the way, these are great questions. Is there a way to separate users from seeing each other? Yeah, from hotel guests to hotel employees, and how would the NC handle multiple DHCP pools for networks that exceeded 254 hosts? An example of 20. Okay, so I think that one. That's 2 different questions. So the first question is pretty simple. A way to separate the users from the guests. There's layer 2 isolation that we offer that we're showing right here under LAN IP settings. There's a LAN port isolation where you just sort of put somebody on a private port, put a network on a private port, and so there's a couple ways to do it. And then the auto LAN isolation kind of separates everybody at layer 2. So it's really secure. We also support VLAN. So there's kind of 3 different ways to separate guests from employees depending on how you want to run the network. You either put in the layer 2 isolation. You probably want to do that anyway. Guests can't see each other. And then if you want to put the hotel users, or excuse me, the hotel employees on their own port and do a LAN port isolation, you can do that. And then finally, you could set up VLAN. So there's a different ways to go. And then next question is, how would the NC controller handle multiple DHCP pools for networks that exceed a 254 host connection? An example, a 24-hour period. Okay, I'm going to have Michael answer that one.
Yeah, so you can set up to 1,000 individual leases. In addition, there's another thing I can show you, which is you can actually set up multiple subnets and then just use an alias gateway for each subnet. So this is usually kind of the combination that we see is usually there's a public network based on DHCP that has public users on it, and then there's one or more either private networks or management networks that are used just for equipment at the site that are set up on separate subnets. If you need actually separate DHCP pools for each one of these subnets, that's not something that the 3560 will do. However, if you set up a DHCP server to serve, different ranges of IPs to different subnets, you can override the DHCP on the controller, or you could just disable it as well to use a different gateway as the default gateway. So kind of between those options, you can definitely set up your network the way you want. But there isn't currently a way to actually have multiple pools, coming out of the 3560 all by itself, at least at this point.
Okay, next question is, can that work with Radius? And I'd probably have to get back to specifically what that is, but I think, again, the question is about the bandwidth limits working with Radius. And if that person could, just contact us directly. After the meeting, we can kind of work through that, what you can do with Radius in terms of bandwidth limiting and global bandwidth limits and so forth. Another question, okay, I have a Nomadix AG3100 is what they're saying with 200 subscribers. What device would you recommend if I need up to 500 subscribers? Okay, well, first of all, we don't have any license limits with our products, so it's not the kind of thing where you need to buy license packs like with some of the other products, and there's no annual fees that you need to buy to keep it working. So if you're looking at replacing something like a Nomadix, where we've replaced a lot of Nomadixes through the years, so we know it pretty well, you just basically, in terms of if you've got 200 subscriber limit now, what we would look at is the performance that you need at that site. And so you'd go with, you could go with one 3560 or stack two 3560s. So if you stack two 3560s, you're going to have 130 megabit per second throughput, total throughput, which may be more than you've got on the WAN anyway. In which case, your WAN's going to be your bottleneck and not your gateway. And then we'd say you could handle 400 concurrent subscribers with that. And again, that's a performance rating. So if you really wanted to go and make sure, the 3560 compared to the 3100 from Nomadix, we're probably as fast on the performance as that one. So probably one unit. But you could get 2 units if you're looking for more. And again, it's just a performance rating. There's no license limit on that, and you can contact us after the meeting here to go over it. Next question is, how many ISPs can the device use? Okay, great question. So on the 4000, assume you're asking about the 4000, the A4000. We're talking about 3 on that, and that's. So Michael's gonna get into the 4000 interface here real quick. Up to 3, WAN 1, WAN 2, WAN 3, and then a 3G as a 4th. So I guess actually 4 if you count the 3G. And so far so good. It seems like most people are running it with 2. We've got some people running it with 3 interfaces. If somebody's got a requirement for more, we'll look at that. We could definitely look at And in the 4,000 side, we're definitely going to be looking at a higher capacity line if the if the market requires it. Now, I should mention if you are looking at more today, how could we handle that today? Then what we would recommend is you go with if you went with two 3560s, stacked them, and two 4,000s, then you're going to have up to 6. That gives you up to 6 WAN Ethernets and 2 3Gs, so a total of 8. So that would be kind of your maximum capacity today with our products. And okay, so again, contact us after the meeting if you want to ask more. And then your question about yearly subscription or cost. We don't require any subscription. There's no annual fee to keep it running. And then the cost we probably get into you after the meeting, and we can quote you your price and go over how that works. But it is a one-time price, and upgrades are free as long as you're inactive. You stay active, which we can get into that too. It doesn't require too much to be an active account. And then we never require any kind of subscriptions. It says here, maybe I missed this, but was it possible to limit the amount of simultaneous connections per account? I believe, yeah, Michael can go through that.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to do that. I've seen some pretty sophisticated uses of Radius that basically will allow 1 or 2 or 3 logins from a particular account. What you can do in the controller local authentication is you can limit each MAC address. You can tie a MAC address to the account either before the user logs in, or you can also set it so as soon as there's a login, you capture the MAC address. And that's pretty popular for prepaid cards. That just ensures that prepaid cards can't be reused, they can't be shared with somebody else. As soon as that code gets used, it gets tied to a specific machine. So like if we take a look at this guest account, this is currently set to an unlimited number of PCs, and they all have to log in. As opposed to that, we could force a single PC to log in, meaning once somebody logged in, it's tied to their machine. Or we could tie it to a single PC. And this is that kind of single login that David talked about for something more like a dorm or an apartment, where somebody, the first time they use the account, it gets tied to their machine, and then they never log in again. But if someone else tried to use that account, they would get an error, saying that account has already been used. So that's a way you can limit it to a single account, or Radius has settings to allow kind of number of simultaneous sessions if you wanted to allow 1 or 2 or 3 logins per account. That's 2 options you would have. Then there's another question in here about how to do mobile phone landing pages, and that's usually something that's done in the code on the page itself. So typically what you would have is you'd have a login page that has basically has some detection code so that Firefox users get one version of the page, Internet Explorer gets a different version, Safari gets a different version, and then in addition to that, you can also have, there's special parameters for iPhones to get a particular format page. Also kind of the super mobile, kind of the old style mobile phone browsers that are, based on Java. Those also can be detected. So that's something that you would either host that on your external login page, or all that stuff could be put locally on the controller. So if you take a look, there's a whole section to basically upload as much web content as you have.
Okay, and then it looks like a couple more questions here coming in. You keep them coming up. You mentioned stacking devices. Do they share a local database? What would happen there is Michael can probably take that better as well.
You would just load the same database on both units, and it's quite simple to just upload the database. And another thing that's interesting is you can actually set the units to download a database remotely. We have some customers who have, a large network of, apartment sites where users, kind of have roaming, between different sites. And they kind of share one large local database between all those sites. So the units can be set to basically download you see here you put in a TFTP server, and then you basically download that. You download those logins between the sites. So that's something you could do with 2 units, or just put the same database on both the units.
Okay, and then the next question probably Michael's going to handle as well. Does the firewall on the NC allow port knocking? And port, are you familiar with that, Michael?
I'm not familiar with the term port knocking. We do port forwarding. Certainly port blocking can be done by port, or there's a packet filter that you can use to block traffic based on any parameters in the packet. So I don't know if maybe you mean like port triggering, where you kind of trigger a port based on incoming traffic, and that's not currently in the 3560, and we haven't had a lot of requests for that. It's certainly something that we would consider adding if there was an application that required port triggering. But yeah, let me know if that answered your question. I haven't heard that term port knocking before, but.
Okay, and everybody, yeah, feel free. We showed the contact earlier as info at ValuePoint or sales at ValuePointNet.com. You can call us at our number. Just Google us and find us on the web, and all the contact information's there. As far as port knocking, you want to handle that, Michael? Some more about port knocking.
Yeah, so that would be no. Yeah, we haven't implemented. Port knocking. So probably if it's tied to some specific application, like some kind of voice over IP for phones, or if there's some application that uses that, it's certainly something that we could add if there is if there's an application that would make use of that. But yeah, we don't currently have a feature like that.
Okay, good question. And then can you set up a pass-through device to be monitored IEAPs? Yes, absolutely. And both the 4000 and the 3560 allow it. So if you got them back to back, you can get all the way through to your APs. And here we're showing the just a really simple AP monitoring table. And then you have up to I don't know how many devices there, Michael. Total, it's quite a few.
Yeah, I think it's
up to 50 APs on that, or 50 devices. And then as we're showing here, then you can go back and look at them in system status and so see if they're up or down. And a lot of people will set up their monitoring systems to be email alert if something goes down. That can all be set up. So yeah, the answer is yes, you can do it. And here's how you do it on the 3560, and then there's a similar way to do it on the 4000 to pass all the way through. Okay, and I guess any other questions? We don't have any more on this end here. If anybody else wants to submit more, or again, yeah, we've kind of hit our allotted time, and so I guess we can go ahead and conclude it. And again, the contact information, and I'll pass it back to Ryan for a quick wrap-up.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. We really enjoyed your participation in the question and answers. That was just a brief overview of a few key installations. We're just trying to get you guys geared up, and all the features are in the product so you can go out and sell better. And if you have any questions at all, please send them in to sales at valuepointnet.com. We really look forward to working with you guys more in the future here, and we will send a follow-up email to everyone about this, everyone who attended this webinar. And it looks like...
Okay, one final question. I just answer that real quick. Yes. So with the BA 4000, the best way to do, the question is there an email notification if an ISP goes down, and that'd be on the BA 4000, presumably, because it's managing the ISPs. And the answer is yes, we're adding that the very next release. We've got that coming. So you get an email notify if an ISP goes down. Okay, so that's a great question, because the more notifications you can get, the better on what's going on at the site. Okay.
Yeah, and that, Dave's answer kind of illustrates one other thing. We're constantly developing these products and adding new features on monthly, bi-monthly basis. Extremely actively supported products. I know some of the competitors' products out there are legacy at this point. No new firmware, very little support. So this is what helped us become the industry leader in gateways here in the U.S. in hospitality. And we're making a really strong, reliable product, and we're sure that you are going to be happy with it and your customers as well. So we're going to sign off, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks again for your attendance.